These are the forces of the Indian Army and paramilitary. Their motto is duty unto death, and death has been the hallmark of their reign.
Our memories are a form of trauma too because you don't forget them.
I don't know the outcome if I'm gonna reveal it. So the story is about when I was in 10th standard. I was just 16 years old back in 2015 when I was illegally arrested along with few other teenagers while we were traveling towards our tuitions. We were detained in a small unhygienic cell with murderers and rapists. In the police station, we were subjected to torture, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, until most of us started vomiting blood from our mouths. This was all done under the command of DSP Ejaz at police station Khania, Srinagar. The police also demanded hefty ransom from our families in order to secure our release. After weeks of beatings and humiliation, I was not even allowed to appear in my board exams. Me and my whole family requested the high-rank police officers like Superintendent of Police Srinagar and his deputy just to allow me to appear in my board exams and then arrest me again afterwards. In return, they abused me, they abused my whole family. I felt helpless at that time. I was imprisoned in 6 different police stations of Srinagar. Every time we were shifted to other police stations, the officers in charge repeated the same torture, sexual abusement, and even asked for ransom from our families. We were forced to pay ransom for our release by every new officer in the charge. I feel ashamed to call them officers, they don't deserve to be called one. They have been given free hand by the authority, they have destroyed the youth of Kashmir. Occupation has destroyed the future of Kashmir. Youth of Kashmir are totally demoralized, depressed by the daily torture and harassment by Indian forces. At last, I just want to say we Kashmiris also are humans.
One day while leaving for school, when I reached the army camp, I saw something that left me traumatized as a kid. I saw a person was hanging upside down from a tree while army men around him were beating him. This image left me traumatized. It remains for me the most vivid memory of a military occupation that India has subjected Kashmir to.
It was the summer of 1992. I was fast asleep back home in our house in Srinagar. I was shocked to see an Indian Army platoon barging into the inner courtyard of our family home. I stood there frozen, still next to my parents, scared out of my wits, not comprehending what was happening. Stomping all over our home, rummaging through our closets, exposing our intimates, and then snaring at us in their own language. It was intimidating, terrifying, at the same time very humiliating. Those hours of invasion in our home seemed like the longest ever. Even well after the army left, we were still very emotionally disturbed.
I still remember the sunny winter afternoon after there was an armed encounter between the militants and the Indian occupying forces in a nearby area. And that was the norm back those days. Once the gunfire was over, then the Indian military or the occupying forces will come around and go on a rampage. So that's exactly what happened that day. And our home happened to be one of them on that day. And I was dragged out on the road. So the moment I was dragged out, they started beating me with their gun butts. They put their boot on my foot so I couldn't move, and then everybody else started to beat me. I think it was 6 or 7 armed military personnel. And I cannot really get that picture out of my mind of my grandmother. And then she came out and I could see her beating her chest. And, it's a big deal for women women to come outside on a road without, we used to call it burqa, with a hijab, if you will. And she came out. She started to plead with the military. And I still remember, while I was taking the beating, I still remember her telling her nani, and this is in Kashmir, I said, "Saas andar, iman hoon in mukazzazar par." In other words, I meant, please go inside. Do not plead with these dogs. Because I could take anything, but I could not take the humiliation of my grandmother.
I fight for Kashmiri freedom because I love Kashmir. I am of Kashmir. I belong to Kashmir. Kashmir has a right upon me. I fight for Kashmiri freedom because that is the only right thing to do. It's the only moral thing to do. It's the only ethical thing to do as a Kashmiri. I fight for Kashmiri freedom because I want our ancestors to know that their sacrifices were not in vain. I fight for Kashmiri freedom so we can bring back the last remains of Shaheed Maqbool Bhatt and Shaheed Afzal Guru. I fight for Kashmiri freedom so brother Ashraf Mattu can sleep in peace, knowing Shaheed Tufail Mattu's shahadat was not in vain. So sister Asiya Andrabi can return home to her children. I fight for Kashmiri freedom so I can build a tiny gravestone on my Dada's grave, which is right now desecrated by the Indian Army. I fight for Kashmiri freedom so my people suffering under the heavy yoke of 434 years of Begar, slavery, colonialism, and Brahminical slavery for 200 years can finally breathe free. I fight for Kashmiri freedom because I cannot breathe free until my compatriots, my Hamwatan, can breathe free. I fight for Kashmiri freedom because fighting for freedom is the only thing I've learned in this world.
Azadi!